Need to get my easy bake oven on there. I'll be ready to go. And before I start spewing from both ends of myself.
I'm like Karen on Facebook. Like Daniel Tiger has taught me this. Two things can be true at the same time. Like you need to eat your dinner and don't pee your pants.
Welcome to another episode of the Meat-N-Tater Show. I'm here with my co-host Meat.
Greetings and salutations.
I'm Tater, and we're excited to bring you this week's show. We're going to make our way through some meaty facts and some buttery opinions. This week's topic is the government repressing our First Amendment right when it comes to religious gatherings? And to help us out a little bit today, we have a guest. His name is Damian Parks. Those of you that might be watching this video and you're familiar with him, you know how famous and how good looking he already is. But Damian, why don't you tell us a little bit about what brings you to our show today and kind of what you do and why you do it?
Well, I'm here first and foremost because I'm a conspiracy theorist at heart. I'm excited to be here. I followed you guys for a little bit, paid attention, watched the episodes, and I'm just excited to jump in on the conversation. That's the reason why I'm here. That's my first.
All right. Awesome.
What do you want to know about me, though?
What's your favorite episode?
What's the names of your episode? What can I say? 2? Would that ring a bell?
You can just say like the subject. What were we talking about?
Oh gosh. Okay, hold on. I'm pulling them up. I got 3 here.
Oh man, stumped already. This is a good start.
Yeah.
Hold on. Hey, you guys are out of control. You guys can't let me hang out on the podcast just to stump me publicly. That's not good.
Yeah. We're going to build our reputation on public humiliation.
Yes. That's the type of
Whether it's
person
our own or somebody else's.
I did like the Kurt Cobain stuff.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
That was probably, I'm going to go with that one.
Okay.
Wait, so are you pro-suicide or pro-arranged?
Pro Kurt Cobain. That's what I am.
Pro-Kurt, okay.
Although there was a brief moment in my life when I was all in on the Courtney Love part of that story. So, but not anymore. Not anymore.
Gotcha.
There's not much to it anymore.
Yeah.
It just is what it is.
Max, sorry, man. I know you're trying to convince the people out there to jump in the conspiracy bandwagon.
I mean, it's the good thing about this country. You're free to be absolutely wrong, however wrong you want to be.
That's what I love
you
about
have
it.
the freedom to do it. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see my shirt.
Maybe they might be taking it away from it.
Freedom.
They might be taking it away from it. So I don't know.
Well, while it's still there, you be as wrong as you want to be.
All right, Max, why don't you take us off and introduce our topic and kind of get a little bit more into our topic and what triggered this conversation for us today.
All right. So is the government crapping on our First Amendment right to gather and practice whatever religion you're happy to practice? Way back a couple months ago in Kentucky, it started with some people in church in Kentucky. They were attending church from their cars, and the state tried to arrest a bunch of people and fine them. I think it was like $500 too. It was a bunch of money to not go to church. And the Supreme Court came back and said that's unconstitutional and ruled in the favor of the churchgoers. And so that was a big victory for the First Amendment right. And now California's governor, this was the 3rd of July from Twitter, California's governor just banned singing and chanting at church. Catholics can't recite Mass. Evangelicals can't worship out loud. The very definition of discrimination is to allow thousands to march and scream without masks while telling churches 100 or less that you cannot sing. So basically, in California, there's a lot of things at church that you can't do that make church, right? And then the whole time that that's going on, though, there was a Black Trans Lives Matter protest going on. And we'll have links to these pictures in the show notes below here. But there's a huge march, probably thousands of people. And it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm sure that they don't all have masks on. And even if they do or don't, there's nobody there policing, walking around, making sure that they don't have masks on. So the connection there is that, people are allowing, or, states and governments are allowing these types of things in the spirit of, COVID. Like, why aren't they banning congregations of thousands of people without masks? But they can close your business, they can close your church, they're arresting people at the beach, they're banning funerals and graduations. Why are they doing all of that stuff together?
Right. So it seems like there might be a little bit of a setup here to take advantage of a lot of different aspects of the 2020 climate to infringe a little bit on religious freedom. So that's one of the main tenets of our country, is to have religious freedom, that we can celebrate whatever we want to celebrate and worship whatever we want to worship, or not. So I do think there is a potential for concern here. But before I get into that, Damien, you want to throw anything out there on your assessment of kind of the situation so far before we get into some more details on it?
Well, I want to throw this back at you because I want to take you guys' opinion on it. Obviously, I'm pretty invested in a local faith community myself. So I think one of the things I'd like to hear you guys talk about, it just seems from a lot of the headlines, a lot of stuff we can read nationally, the restrictions, the can't do this, can't do that, seem to be really fluid. And by that I mean they can, just depending on the state, depending on the location. Is that something you guys have seen, or do you see this more as these restrictions coming down on First Amendment as a universal thing that's happening all across the country? Does that make sense what I'm asking? Like, what is your guys' take from just outside looking at it? You see this more as a universal, or do you see it more of as a fluid based on location and based on the...
Can you give an example of what you're talking about?
Like California is a lot different than what you see in Nevada or what you see in Arizona. Those states touch each other.
You want to take the first stab, Dane?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the things he might be getting at there is Max, you cited that California is banning the chanting and singing at churches. Well, Oklahoma, while they say that, I think one of the 7 serious areas where we have to be careful of spreading, like one of the things is religious gatherings, but they haven't quite mandated anything about that yet. You know what I mean? So they make a mention of it. So there's not quite any infringement upon a First Amendment right necessarily to basically say you're not allowed to do that. And they do have, some recommendations for how to behave in such scenarios. But so while in California, you have one group saying we're going to start really, kind of repressing some of this and getting ourselves involved as a government to make sure that people aren't violating these rules. And then in Oklahoma, we have an awareness of it, but we don't have any like anything beyond just like, hey, just be careful if you're in these types of groups, and one of those types of groups just so happens to be a religious community.
So maybe kind of an odd analogy to draw here, but I think back to when marijuana was first legalized in the country. It was legalized in like one state at a time in more progressive states, and then it kind of just swept across the country. I think it's like 30 states or something right now have it legalized, at least recreationally. And so this seems kind of be something like that, where there's going to be one state that kind of takes the lead on something like this before it becomes a little bit more widespread for other states to jump in and mandate what the people of the state can and can't do. Right now, it's just kind of measuring a pushback. If the people don't push back on the mandates that are levied by the California governor, then maybe other states will jump on board. Or I don't have that. My crystal ball hasn't shown me how that's gonna turn out yet.
The lizard people haven't quite spoken to you, telling you what's
Right?
next.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. The reason I ask that is sometimes people tend to take a particular scenario and turn it into a universal, and I think that can be something that's played on both sides in a lot of ways. And so I've seen several posts out there talking about the California situation or other situations in a few other states and saying, hey, this is where we're going if we don't blah, blah, blah. And so that's why the reason I bring that up, because it just, to me, it seems as though this is a very fluid, very subjective sort of ban that's, I don't want to call it a ban, but it's very splotchy, to use that word, right? Like in terms of, this week it's this week it's that. And it just seems to be really fluid time right now. So that's my initial take on a lot of these. It's so weird how quickly things can shift and change. It almost seems weekly that things are changing. That to me is more alarming, at how some things can move so fast that don't necessarily need to move that fast. There's not much thoughtfulness going on in these conversations.
A lot of it has to do with the lag in information, because COVID itself takes 2 weeks to kind of progress. And then there's always a lag in testing and reporting as well. So you've got, about 10 to 20 days between whenever things happen and whenever the big spikes happen on all the charts. So it's kind of hard for people to make changes on the fly. Like, yeah, I see what you're saying. But
And how much on the other side too is we're so used to getting information when we want it, exactly
Right.
how we want it. And I think you're spot on there that the data can't necessarily keep up with the way that we want it. And I think that can add to, oh, it's Thursday, let's do this. Okay, next Tuesday you're going to do this, and the information's not even there.
Right.
It's just a very interesting time, I think, in that regard too, because we're so used to getting what we want when we want when it comes to data, but we're not getting that now. It's throwing us off a little bit.
Right. And so this is something that I'll probably call back to a lot, but the reason why conspiracies exist, like early on, Max and I discussed this, is the psychology behind conspiracy is that what happens when you have a lack of information, when you have a lack of truth and stability, we have to fill those gaps with something. And I think to even add to that, if you kind of look at like a societal grieving process, is that we are as a society in different stages of how we're grieving the difficulty of a pandemic and these, the political state of our country and just so many other things that are going on. So some are in denial, some are angry, some are bargaining, some are, just whatever stage that they're in. And then you combine that with the natural human desire to make things simple. Like, let's just make things as simple as possible, as understandable as possible, as digestible as possible. And in the process of trying to do that, what we have to do is sometimes create the information on our own. So that gives us kind of the conspiracy idea. So I'm kind of in a weird spot on this whole situation because after looking at a couple of Pew reports from the Pew Research Group in 2014, they have some information about an increase, especially in America, of regulation over religious communities. And then you look at again in 2019, they have worldwide increases. And so there's a lot of like actual statistical information out there from the Pew Research organization. And so it kind of lends towards the world overall becoming more regulatory against religious groups. And it's kind of hard to, in my mind, completely ignore the possibility of this conspiracy, only because if you take it as something as simple as zoning where a church building can be, someone might say that is a restriction upon religious freedom because a particular group of people want to put their building in this part of the city for whatever reason. The city says, no, you can't do that because this is not zoned for that. So it could be something as simple as that, but it also could go much further. Like I wouldn't say what Max has brought up is necessarily the far extreme on the other end, but it definitely is more intense to be able to tell people that they can't sing at church. My biggest question, though, that keeps me from I'm kind of moderate on this. The one thing that keeps me going one way or the other is like, what is there to gain as far as right now? What is there to gain in this particular conspiracy? Like, so what's the government looking?
Like, what you asking me, the Max, or what?
Or either one, both of you can respond.
Damon, you want to go first?
You can go ahead.
I'll go ahead. Okay. So it's always kind of a slippery slope whenever they start taking away rights. If they can take away singing, then at some point maybe they can say, you know what, this has progressed too much, we're just going to cut out church altogether. The censorship can go farther. Like, maybe now we don't think people should be able to say what they want to say because they've already established like the ability that they can take things away. So now they can take away the rest of your First Amendment rights. I'm not going to try to invent a situation. I don't want anybody to get any ideas. No, I'm just kidding. But
the government's going to come back and say, we call this the Max Wood theorem.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to use this to execute religious regulation.
Meat-N-Tater Act. Yeah.
Right.
But so, and then once they take away the First Amendment, right, then they can take away, second, third, fourth. And so that's kind of the idea of, or the whole systematic oppression approach, that once, you start to lose one right, it's open season on the rest of your rights. And then that would be the way that government, gains complete and utter control.
I guess, well, I may give like 4 points here, and then you can ask me questions about either one. I guess the first thing I'll make just about conspiracy theories in general, and I think they're really awesome, and I love them and enjoy them, and I want to talk to flat earthers as much as possible. I've even tried to spend 6 months thinking I was a flat earther and trying to operate as if I was one.
Are you looking for the ice shelf still?
It was really awesome meeting new people and telling them, leading in with that. You know what I mean? Like, before you give me your last name, I'm a flat earther. No,
Amy
but
in flat Earth parks.
the first thing I'd say, I think it's important to explore conspiracy theories as symbols rather than rational constructs.
Hmm.
And I just think that because it allows the individual or the local community to take those symbols and either point them in a different direction or point them in a direction that they choose, or it gives them a lot of space to provide an interpretation for that symbol. That's the first thing I say. And so I see a lot of faith communities that are raising the flag of watch out, right? Here we go, in a symbolic way, like, posing for pictures with your name engraved on a Bible, sort of symbolic way. And also at the same time, as a Christian, I always I'm a little leery when an empire deems a church as an essential business. So when I hear some of these conversations, it becomes, if the empire calls you essential, then you might want to rethink what's going on here. As believers. So there's part of this side of the convo too that's like, hey, they're not letting you sing. Well, yeah. why would they want us to sing in some regards? So
on the second point, I kind of want to expound just a little bit, because I think there might be some assumed understandings of what you mean by empire and religious communities, like the relationship between the two. So maybe we can explore that just real quick.
Oh yeah, well, how so? How do you want me to play that?
So I mean, I would just say that kind of what you're mentioning there is that in your Christian background, that Jesus was a representative who resisted the empire of his time with the way that he lived and the things that he taught. And so to see a conflation or a religious institution in bed with the powers that be now would be opposite of what your original institution would have been, right? I mean, that's kind of what I would say to kind of explain it just a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that historically, and I embrace a lot of my Christian brothers and sisters that may not agree with me. I'm okay with the Big Ten. And so we as Christians and as the church have had a really bad understanding and relationship to empire, both empire and power in general. Mm-hmm. And it's a very triumphalist approach that it happens on both sides of the aisle too. So, and we can talk more about this way, you and I were chatting earlier about just completely, this doesn't even exist, this COVID-19, right? How does that come out of it? It's a very interesting thing whenever you have I've joked about this before, but Christians should not speak in universal truths. We speak in particular. And from that, so we follow a crucified homeless Jew. So the idea of any conversation that we have about power is rooted in that. Mm. And the idea that, an empire needs to dictate blank so that we can blank is it seems like a conversation that we're way down the road, in a weird direction than where we started. So I would say that I was joking tongue in cheek there when the empire deems you as an essential business. That should make us rethink some things as the church. It should not make us go, let's fight the power so I can sing, the latest Hillsong. It should not get
right
down that road. You know what I mean? Because let's be honest, most people in church can't sing anyway. It's not.
You're going to make a lot of people
good.
You're probably already making people mad, but now you really got them mad.
It's just true. I'm horrible.
They thought they were carrying the notes.
When I'm in my room with my tribe,
Yeah,
I sound okay. But let's be honest, the songs, we sing like 11 songs, right? That we like. So,
right.
I promise you, he didn't want to hear Oceans again.
Yeah. So I don't want to derail too much, but what it sounds like is there is a relationship and a kind of a complexity here, which is a true religious institution isn't necessarily interested in political power. So there's some complexity here with saying, okay, as we navigate these religious and political waters of what's an infringement, what's not an infringement, we're kind of looking at like, okay, what's the relationship really supposed to be between religious communities and the political powers that be?
I hope that when Max started talking, I hope that this sort of thing helps religious communities start to think through those things. And I hope it does for individuals that are particularly involved in a religious community as well, right? Like, to really start to think through, can there be things that no one can take from you, period, regardless of it, right? Like, let's start to think about those things as a, you know what I mean? As opposed to, did you get the latest Jordans? You know what I mean? Can you believe they won't let me buy the latest Jordans?
Right.
Okay. Like, come on now. Like that's, maybe that's fun for a couple hours because I like shoes, but
Right.
that you can't live off that. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I hope that when you look at Kentucky or California or some of these other things, it prompts people not to go, let's plug in the Rage Against the Machine, the second album, right? Evil Empire, and let's take this thing down. Let's start to have a really honest reflection about, oh my gosh, what does it mean to be free? What does it mean to have freedom? And what does it mean to live in this world in the midst of all that, right?
Sure.
And, so I'm hoping that it pushes beyond that. That's what I hope.
Yeah.
And I hope it does that for religious communities too. Like, okay, so you can't sing this weekend. Okay, well, we can go somewhere else in the world where I can show you where they don't have 8 screens, moving lights. You know what I'm saying? Like, and they don't even meet in a building. Like, are they like, can you believe it? They can't even be Christian there. Like, no, like, it's just, hopefully it helps you see that it's going to be okay. It's
Right. Right. And I think, well, one, I want you to promise me that the next time you sing with your faith community that you'll sing Killing in the Name by Rage Against the
Listen, I
Machine.
have pushed. There's been a lot of things that my church community has looked at me strangely, but I've brought that up before.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, I don't want to get too far into the weeds there. So you had four points or so that you were saying. So you want to kind of rehash your first two. So
I just think it's important to explore conspiracy theories as symbols rather than rational constructs. That's point number one, because then it helps. At least it helps me see. Oh my gosh, X person shared this on blank social media, and it leads you, like, you could just read for 2 minutes and realize it's not real. Like, it's total fake, but they're bought into it, right? But it created a space symbolically for them to fill in the gaps with ideology. There's that element to things. And I think that this one is so critical for faith communities to go, oh my gosh, look what they're doing in California. Get ready, right? These cultural Marxists are going to come in and take us out, right? So that would be point number one, because it helps explore the ideology of the water that we're swimming in. Number two, it's a problem for me when Christians see themselves as an essential business, period, aligned with the empire. That's a problem. Number three is churches and faith community, and Christians specifically. I think we really need to rethink our relationship to power. And then the fourth one is, it's all sides of the coin of the Christian faith right now, whether it be, fundamentalists, conservative evangelicals, just mainline Protestants, and even progressives, even all across the board. We have our own tendencies to try and align ourselves with worldly power. Can be very destructive. We just need, the fourth point is, we gotta, at least I speak as faith community, we gotta figure out how local faith communities can discern when and when not to, and how to align themselves with power.
Sure.
So that's what I would say. Those are my 4 points.
Okay. Max, you want to respond to any of that?
I feel like you guys have had this conversation already, and I'm just now coming into it.
No.
Oh, no, not with each other.
Okay.
No, I've had
Max,
this conversation.
listen, the last time I
other
talked
places.
to Dane one time in the last 3 months, and twice. Not take that back. Both times I talked to him, I had major electrical problems in my house.
Right. Yeah. Not my fault, though. Not my fault.
So if I'm having electrical problems and I'm talking about this, then that's the reason I have electrical problems.
Got it.
No, I mean, this is something I study and I think about, but it's definitely not something that I really haven't talked much out loud about it, because most people I know aren't interested in the conversation.
I'm very sympathetic to a lot of my Christian brothers and sisters that feel so threatened by the lack of singing in the building on Sunday. I feel really sympathetic for that. Like, I really do. And that's not me. But at the same time, there's a lot of my brothers and sisters that feel that way. So I empathize in that regard. That I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that would be so hard to feel that taken away, that's been such a key player in your life. And at least it's a formation thing. And so just hearing about it, that's what I mean by just hearing about it and seeing that conspiracy theory of what they're doing in blank state on blank Sunday is really threatening in a lot of ways. And so it's, I don't know, I feel for them. I really do.
Sure.
There's a pretty hot button back and forth right now in, evangelical Christianity between conservative evangelicals and progressives. And conservative evangelicals are primarily concerned with communicating the gospel or having people make a faith decision for Christ, and a complete rejection of what would be deemed as social justice. And then progressives have become almost consumed with social justice in a way that they're not interested in having conversations about heaven or whatever. Just pick, you know what I'm saying? So it's a real back and forth that's going on there, and they're both playing at that power dynamics in really interesting ways. So both of them would look at that, what's happening in California, completely differently.
Right.
You know, one side would be like, oh my gosh, like, why would you want to sing? Like, get out there and march. And then the other side's like, why would we want to march when we need to sing? You know, so both of them are going to see that headline and go, okay, yeah, this is good. We're winning this battle, right? We're aligning ourselves with what's going on in the progressive future of America, and blah, blah, blah. And the other side's going, they're taking this away from us. You better watch out, you know? Like, it's a very interesting thing, like how this conspiracy theory flushes itself down. And so that was my last point, is it's weird how it plays itself out. But all of it, for at least Christians in this church convo, is it's all about the church's relationship to power. All about that for me. And that's almost how faith communities see these headlines of this conspiracy theory. It's really weird.
Dane, I'll let you take first.
Okay. So what I find interesting in the conversation so far is that I think, to kind of feed into a more conspiratorial mindset, is that the reason why the largest denomination or the largest religion, the Christian religion in America, might be the one that is under attack or under pressure from the government is because there are more people to control, and there are more people to sway one way or another. There are more people to take out of a form of resistance if you can take away their rights to organize as a religion. So I think that's kind of one of the things that kind of plays off of what Damien is saying, is that once you marry yourself to, if you're a religious institution and you marry yourself to religious power, then you are going to kind of find yourself in a very awkward situation when that marriage sours, because, religious institutions are, they're, as I see what politicians do with religious institutions, is they use them as political baiting. I don't think political institutions are really, like, and by design, I don't think there's really supposed to be that invested in one or the other. Like, you see people talk about, going to church, presidents going to church on Sunday, but we all know you don't go to church on Sunday. It's okay. You don't have to try to convince people that you attend Sunday morning, Sunday night, and whatever's going on in between. So
I think Trump has the most rounds of golf played by any president. I imagine he doesn't get that by going to church on Sundays.
He's up there with a good Baptist deacon, Max. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. So to kind of rehash that point, is I would say that this could be pretty dangerous ground, that if you can ignite a particular sect of a religious group, especially the most dominant religious group in America, to further embed itself with political power, then what you can do is you can actually use that as a weapon to unseat the religious folks from any sort of power. So I would say, just to kind of give an example of what I mean by that, is that you have potential repression of the First Amendment, but then you have the Supreme Court's ruling recently that Christian organizations can, in fact, opt out of the Affordable Care Act when it comes to contraception and birth control, right, for women. So around 75,000 to 125,000 or 150,000 women are going to be affected by this. But what it looks like to a certain group of people is going to say, hey, look, we got what we wanted from our elected officials. We got the power to swing our direction. And I think what's more dangerous is not so much that there's a mandate to say you can't sing at church, but I think it's actually more dangerous to convince people that, hey, you know, the 81% of the white evangelicals that voted Donald Trump into power are saying, hey, look, we're actually getting what we want. And then what's going to happen is the government will take that support, take that energy, and they'll swing that into actual into a more covert way of undoing religious freedoms in America. So I think it's a super complex topic. I think it's a very complex way of trying to deal with it all. And then Max, to address your idea of the slippery slope, is that I think once we realize that we're at a particular stage of the slippery slope, and if we tried to stop it, I think there's going to be probably multiple levels that we continue to slide before we actually get it to stop. So I don't really have an example of that. I don't have a historical tangible example other than the two Pew Research articles that basically 5 years apart have cited more religious repression worldwide. And so if that's a trend worldwide, I imagine that eventually it'll be a part of America's culture. So I don't know what either one of those points mean. I don't know if that's an answer or a rebuttal, or if that was valuable at all. But I think that I think maybe I'm talking myself into a more extreme version of this conspiracy.
It's like, man, this is taking on a whole new look now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we meeting up after this? Is that what you're saying? Like,
Yeah.
what?
Oh, and something I did want to say before I forget is, so if you're able to dethrone or to I guess this might be a weird way to say it, but if you're able to like neuter your dominant religious force in the in the religious political spectrum, then it's going to be easier to hit your more minority religious groups. So your Muslims, your Buddhists, your Hindus, fill in the gaps with other groups that probably keep to themselves more, that are not in the public spotlight as much, like, or even apolitical people, because you just never know. You just never know when something's going to be classified differently. So if you're able to kind of do this really terrible version of coercion to the religious group that's marrying itself to the political powers, if you're able to do that with a major group, then it's going to be easy to do that with the rest of the smaller groups as well.
Can I ask both of you guys a question here?
Yeah.
You brought up an interesting word, and I want to hear both you guys' take on this. So you use the word coercion, and so what I'm hearing, one of the layers I'm hearing, and you talk about this, is using their positions of power to either take something away or enable something as a form of coercion, right? So we want a desired outcome. I mean, do you see that actually happening in these scenarios that we talked about here? Like when you look at California, do you see that as a coercive move to take that away from the song, or is it just, does that make sense? I'm asking, do you see that playing out
Sure.
in these spaces, or?
I would say that is not the coercive move. I would say the coercive move is the Supreme Court ruling for the to go against the Affordable Care Act. So it's something that's a lot more. It'd be stealthier than that, because I think what California would be doing is pretty in your face. It could be a diversion. You might be able to call it a diversion, but I don't know that it's necessarily. I don't think that's the covert part. I think the covert part is when you you ring the bell and Pavlov's dog comes running. I think that's the coercion right there.
I'm gonna jump on the conspiracy side of it and say that it is the coercion, or
I figured I would say that based on this intro. I just felt like I was
the way that it plays out is that after they instill the city ordinances or whatever, they just don't get repealed. So that may or may not happen, but that's the way that if something were going to be played out that way, that's how it would play out. I looked up the BLM movements were actually in Brooklyn, so they were across the country, but the banning of everything is pretty well also across the country. Like Chicago, most of Illinois is still on lockdown. They have a Democratic governor. So there are a couple of other states like that as well. A lot of places that have Democratic governors are still on lockdown. They're trying to institute more stringent, laws to. Yeah, I get it. It's trying to get in front of COVID, and so it all makes a lot of sense to me. But at some point, you have to say, okay, we're going to go back to living our life, and you guys are keeping us from doing that. So at what point is it going to cross a line?
So you see more the coercion portion of this conspiracy theory and kind of, the regulations that are taking place as being out in front of us.
Trying to get us out in front of the pandemic, but it's like at some point, if people get comfortable with the laws the way that they are, depending on how long the pandemic goes, do they ever appeal it?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, let's just rip the Band-Aid off, and then eventually you get, that sort of move.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But that kind of leads me into what I wanted to ask you. Your first point was about conspiracy theories as a symbol versus a rational construct.
I just say that in terms of thinking through how these can play out in local communities and local individuals, right? Because if you think about, church community, we have symbols for a lot of things, but when it comes to certain conspiracy theories, sometimes I'd like to take if it's an individual or group, take a 30,000 foot level and see if we can connect some dots on the conspiracy theories that they've latched onto and the side that they've latched onto with that particular conspiracy theory, it just gives an interesting picture as to how you see it playing out. And I think, one of the mentions you made a great point early on is that the data is lag and, it takes a couple weeks to get that. And we're so used to getting things now. I think that sometimes people can cling on to a certain side of a conspiracy theory because of its symbolic nature without even thinking through with it, or even being thoughtful internally about, why do I think this about blank? So I'm hopeful that certain people can grow in their critical thinking skills. That would be my first thing for that. So that's why I think of it that way. It's just, let's look at a conspiracy theory as a symbol and how we are interpreting the things around us. Right. I think it's helpful for self-reflection as opposed to.
Is there ever a time that like a conspiracy theory would turn into, I guess, not a rational construct, but it crosses that line from the symbolized to the it's really happening? Is that?
Well, that's probably I would say that plays itself out in the actions of human beings and communities is probably when it becomes real,
So, I guess more of my question is, for you, is there maybe not an example, but there is some criteria that it does change from something that is a conspiracy theory to something that's really happening?
Yeah.
Or do you, once it's not labeled as a conspiracy theory, and then it just can't ever come out of that category?
Well, I would say, like using conversations around science are really good if you can take theories and play them out over the course of time and see how they play out. I fear that most people aren't doing that anymore. Like it's immediately moves from theory to, I don't even need to test that. That's true. Let's run with it. Oh, it's Wednesday. That's right. Yesterday I thought this, but now I had a friend that I disagree with. So he's not my friend anymore because I heard that conspiracy theory. Like it moves way too fast. Like as long as you keep it in that theory position and let it move, right, over the course of time and thought and reading and conversations with other people who may or may not agree with you, right? That, what I would say, is a healthy way to let this play out with theories when they move to a rational conversation. You know what I mean? I think all across the board, people need to do that. I fear that in the age of social media, you see a link, you embrace it, it's a theory, and then boom, I embrace it, it's fact. It moved really quickly. And I'm like, slow down, like,
So I work in a healthcare field, and I know, and out here in Oklahoma, a lot of our patients are extremely conservative. Are you from Oklahoma too, Damien?
Yeah, we'll go with it. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you know about it then. So like, tons of my patients are all very conservative. I get a lot of stuff about how I should be resistant to the 5G towers because they're actually what are causing COVID. And I don't know if you've seen it, but there was a picture floating around Facebook for a while of a tanker, and then on the side of it in giant letters it says COVID-19. So they think that, the government super subversive plot to take over the country is just going to be advertised on the side of a tanker on a giant railroad going through the middle of town in some other part in Oklahoma or something. It's people, but yeah.
Did you tell them that rail cars are often graffitied?
Yeah, well, this one was the rail car was completely clean except for I couldn't believe that I was having this conversation with somebody else, but yeah.
It just needs to move, right? What is it? Hypothesis to theory to law. Like, I just feel like that process has been like fast fooded in a way that we're just grabbing on a hypothesis at this point because we've observed Carl's Jr.'s fries suck. So, okay, whatever, we're good, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's something so random that there's no gap. Like, what do we do here?
There's some bitterness in there, I think.
Yes.
Somebody was told Carl's Jr. was good at one point.
Some real disappointment.
I haven't had Carl's Jr. since the late 90s, and I think I'm actually a better human being because of that.
You probably still have Carl's Jr. in your body somewhere.
Somewhere, yeah.
Oh, yeah. What is it? That's got, it's a 25-year return on that. 3X gum.
Yeah. But I think something that's interesting here, though, is what, someone brought this up to me a couple months ago about what if we end up being Mel Gibson from the movie Conspiracy Theory. Like, he's a conspiracy theorist, and it turns out he's right. You know what I mean? It's like, so how serious, like, especially kind of as we're discussing a topic that's kind of live at the moment, it's not something that's a little further along down the line. It's harder to say, how do we take, practical steps to, like,
I think that that's going to happen in some regards. So I'm fearful that what's going to, I would just be speculating.
Sure.
But let's take the specific example of churches and music on Sunday, California. Let's just play with that one. The past, whatever years, the Christian faith in America has had a really, really close relationship to power of empire. Really, really close. That sort of has been turning last 100, 120 years-ish, depending on how you want to look at whatever different markers. These things take a long time, right? The big shifts. Titanic should have turned 4 hours earlier. Sort of like that. But you have, like, specifically, you're going to take away my ability to sing in a building on Sunday. That may not, to people who are, let's say, non-Christian, that may be like, oh my gosh, who cares? Watch it online. And the other people may be like, oh yeah, well, I don't care about what you're doing, but I care about you taking the fact I can't do that away, whatever it may be. But let's just look specifically at those people in that particular church regard. Got a close relationship with power. It's been changing over the past 120 years, right? The Christian faith is on track to not be the most dominant force that it was in America, similar to Europe and other countries. People in that world have been discipled into that framework, that to be a Christian means I have this relationship with power. I get the desired outcomes that I want or that I need or that allow me the space to do that. That's going to change. You know what I'm saying? And like you said earlier, how do you move when you move from the conspiracy theory to when it's like, oh my gosh, it's really happening? Everyone is going to process that on their own way, and communities are going to process in their own regard. And I don't know how that's going to pan out. It seems, hopefully it becomes, like, I hope with anybody, if you're not a Christian or believer, unbeliever, or atheist or whatever, like, I hope that the posture of your response to that journey is just as powerful as your positions that you held in the journey, right? And that's what I would say to like a lot of these. It's like, okay, just stop and breathe for a second. Let's think through some things. And so I don't know what's going to happen, but it's some things are going to happen, and it's not going to be pretty. I say this as like a pastor of a church and as a Christian, like, it's probably going to be less cool. You know what I mean? Like They used to tell me in the early 2000s, like, hey, dude, wearing this DC Talk shirt is going to make you look like a rebel because no one's going to love Jesus, right? But now it's going to be even more that, right? So you get what I'm saying. Kind of, maybe.
I think so. I think I'm following.
I don't, the outcomes, it's going to happen. Like people, I think Max is spot on. What happens when it becomes real? I don't know, but it will happen because that's the framework is set up to do that. As Christians, at least for me, it's going to be a complete rupture for a lot of my brothers and sisters, and that's what I mentioned earlier. I feel really for them. But I don't know, but it will happen. It will happen.
So it sounds like we're all convinced that the government's taking away our religious freedoms. But Damien says, like, hey, that's the way it's supposed to be. If you're,
well, I only say that as a Christian. I'm not saying it from like a political position.
Sure.
Do I think that a lot of churches have been stripped of their freedom of speech? No, because I log in on Facebook now and I see 37 live worship streams. You know what I'm saying? Like it makes me close Facebook. But I'm saying,
get a lot of invitations to those.
You know what I'm saying? I don't think they fully lost it, but at the same time, I think that, not to be like a hot take, I think it's a natural tendency for people in power to restrict the power of others, regardless of who's in power. So if people of power try to limit the power, yes, that makes sense to me that would happen. That's where I'd be like, all in with you, Max. Let's do this conspiracy theory. They're trying to restrict the power. Yes. Rage Against the Machine, first and second album. Still have the shirt from the Evil Empire CD. But I'm saying, like, you get what I'm saying? I think that's the case, but I think that's the truth with worldly power anyway.
We're going to make shirts fight the Empire.
You can confuse all the Star Wars fans.
We're just going to adopt
Empire's dead.
We're just going to adopt the symbols and everything. It's just, that's who we're going to be. We're going to be the rebellion.
That's right. Let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to check my notes real quick and see if I've got anything else Max, is there anything else you want to bring up on that?
I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting that I'm kind of not entirely sure where you stand with the idea. It sounds like we were talking about the separation of church and state a little bit, but like the idea right now is that it's kind of converging towards less separation whenever you have the state kind of, for lack of a better term, meddling in the affairs of the church. But then that's not how it's supposed to be. That's the whole point of the First Amendment, right? But I guess the flip side of that coin is that a lot of times the church leverages their relationship with the state to try to get what they want. So I don't know, it almost seems like the state is getting back restitution for having given church what they wanted, kind of thing. Or I don't know, I'm kind of confused there.
It seems like a loophole, though, right? I mean, it's like, oh, okay, well, the separation of church and state. It seems like, oh, the politics are supposed to stay out of the religion, but what happens when the religion comes knocking on the door of politics?
Right?
Yeah. Well, I don't have anything. I have no idea what to say to that because I haven't. I mean,
well, they just,
I don't know. It's a strange relationship.
Yeah, I don't know. It's always, well, I say this, Christians, we were probably a little bit better about this in the early 20th century than we are now. Now we're just out in front of people, like Max is saying, and just blatantly do it in front of our face, right? In terms of religious power. But it's always a power dynamic back and forth at play. And it's important for people to be thoughtful and to pay attention when they see things pop up that can be red flags, like this conspiracy theory Max brought up. It's important to pay attention to it and see it. I would say that for me, I'm like, well, don't jump in all in without thinking through, having conversations with people on all sides of the aisle, talking through, seeing where this thing's going, because it can move that way. So great combo though. Great thought there.
We're buying up more guns around here too. So, it's just a matter of time before it all starts popping off.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah. My word choice was very carefully chosen there.
Yeah. I've got a coworker this is off topic, so we'll probably have to cut this out to let the episode end. But I have a coworker who talks about the Second Amendment all the time. And I've just kind of pushed back on a lot of the things he said just to get a rise out of him and talk to him about it or whatever. But one day he said something that was like, he said, now he said, I may not convince you. I think I actually mentioned this in our politics episode, but he said, I may not convince you about any of your opinions about the Second Amendment, any restrictions on it. He said, but the current political climate will definitely convince you to leave the Second Amendment alone. I was like, you know what? You're right. You are right about that. It is definitely convincing me to leave the Second Amendment alone. Don't touch it.
Oh my gosh.
That makes me think of the lawyers out in Missouri standing on their lawn, the lady waving that handgun at
Gosh.
all the people
Yeah.
going by,
Yeah.
and the guy standing there like Rambo with the AR-15. Oh gosh.
Yeah. And she's like super gangster. She's
Oh,
almost got the
yeah.
gun sideways, finger on the trigger and everything.
That's how everybody's gonna look if this gets too far along.
All right. Well, that seems like a good place to close it down.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in. If you like the show, subscribe, leave us some comments, like us on Facebook.
Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Meat-N-Tater Show. Until next time, keep those tinfoil hats polished and ready.
And don't let the lizard people bite. I'm going to leave his laugh in there. That's going to be hilarious.
Yeah.
I was trying to like stare at the camera while you guys are running through your go-to lines. And I'm like, I can't hold it anymore. So good. You guys just instantly become robots. I love it.
Yeah.